Essay number 5, When the Heart Forgets Its Song. Understanding Depression Through Psychology, Music, and Contemplative Practice. The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes. William James. Introduction. There are moments in life when the world does not become darker because the sun has disappeared. It becomes darker because something within us can no longer receive the light. Depression is one of the most common, yet one of the most deeply misunderstood human experiences. It is often described as sadness. Yet those who have lived through it know that sadness tells only a small part of the story. More often, depression feels like the gradual disappearance of color from everyday life. Things that once brought joy become strangely distant. Music may sound empty. Conversations require effort. Simple daily tasks begin to feel unexpectedly heavy. Even hope itself may seem difficult to remember. For many people, depression is not the presence of overwhelming emotion. It is the absence of emotion. Not intense sorrow, but a quiet emptiness. A silence that slowly settles over the heart. Modern psychology and neuroscience have helped us understand that depression is far more complex than simply feeling unhappy. It involves changes in emotion, motivation, attention, sleep, memory, energy, and even the way the brain processes everyday experiences. It is a genuine human condition that deserves understanding, compassion, and appropriate care, not judgment or misunderstanding. Yet throughout history, human beings have searched not only for treatments, but also for meaning. Philosophers have reflected upon suffering. Psychologists have explored the hidden movements of the human mind. Spiritual traditions have asked how hope can survive even during life's darkest seasons. Artists and musicians have often discovered that music is capable of expressing emotions long before words are able to describe them. Perhaps this is why melodies have accompanied humanity through both celebration and grief. A simple song can comfort us. A familiar hymn can awaken forgotten strength. A quiet melody can remind us that, even when we cannot find the right words, something within us continues listening. This essay does not claim that music alone can cure depression. Nor does it suggest that psychological understanding, contemplative practice, or spiritual reflection replace professional care when it is needed. Instead, it invites us to explore how these different paths may complement one another. Psychology helps us understand the mind. Neuroscience helps us understand the brain. Music speaks to our emotions. Contemplative practice gently teaches us how to remain present, even when the path becomes difficult. Together, they may help us rediscover something that depression often hides from view. Not perfection, not constant happiness, but the quiet possibility that the heart's song has not disappeared forever. Perhaps it has only become very difficult to hear. And perhaps, with patience, compassion, appropriate support, and time, the melody can slowly begin to return. Depression often feels like watching meaning, motivation, and hope slowly fade away. Even music, which once brought comfort, may seem strangely distant. And yet, perhaps that is precisely where a new journey can begin. Urban note to our readers. Before we continue, we would like to say something important. If you are living with depression, please remember that you do not have to face it alone. Depression is a real health condition, and seeking support from family, trusted friends, mental health professionals, or healthcare providers is a sign of strength, not weakness. We hope that the reflections in this essay may offer encouragement and companionship, but they are not intended to replace professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Sometimes the bravest first step is simply allowing someone to walk beside you. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Viktor E. Frankl. Chapter 1. When the heart forgets its song. There are wounds that can be seen. A broken bone appears on an X-ray. A cut on the skin gradually heals. A fever can be measured with a thermometer. These conditions are visible. Their presence is rarely questioned. Depression is different. It often leaves no outward mark. A person may smile while carrying an unbearable weight within. They may continue working, caring for others, and fulfilling everyday responsibilities while quietly struggling with exhaustion, hopelessness, or emotional emptiness. Because these wounds are invisible, they are often misunderstood. People living with depression sometimes hear well-meaning advice that unintentionally deepens their pain. Try to think positively. You just need to stay busy. Everyone feels sad sometimes. Although spoken with good intentions, such words may leave a person feeling even more alone. Depression is not a failure of character. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of gratitude. And it is certainly not a sign of personal weakness. Modern psychology understands depression as a complex condition arising from the interaction of many different factors. Biology plays a role. Life experiences matter. Relationships matter. Stress matters. Trauma may matter. Loss may matter. Even circumstances that seem invisible to others may profoundly shape the inner world of an individual. No single explanation fits every person. Every human story is unique. This is one reason why compassion is so important. Before offering advice, we may first need to listen. Before attempting to solve another person's suffering, we may first need to acknowledge that the suffering is real. Sometimes the most healing words are surprisingly simple. I believe you. You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here. These quiet sentences rarely remove depression. Yet they often remove something equally painful: isolation. Psychologists frequently describe depression as narrowing the world. Activities that once brought pleasure lose their color. The future appears smaller. Possibilities become difficult to imagine. Hope itself may seem distant. This narrowing does not happen because the person has stopped caring. Often, it happens because depression changes the way the mind experiences motivation, reward, attention, and possibility. The world itself has not become smaller. The person's ability to experience it has become temporarily restricted. Understanding this difference changes everything. Instead of asking, "Why aren't you trying harder?" we begin asking, "What kind of support might help you take the next small step?" That question carries kindness. It also carries realism. Recovery rarely happens all at once. More often, it begins almost invisibly. One conversation, one appointment, one walk, one meal, one quiet breath, one note played on a familiar instrument. One moment in which a person discovers that, despite everything, a small part of the heart is still capable of responding. Perhaps this is where hope quietly begins. Not as certainty, not as immediate happiness, but as the willingness to believe that today's darkness does not define tomorrow forever. The heart may have forgotten its song, yet forgetting is not the same as losing. Sometimes the melody remains patiently beneath the silence, waiting for the moment when it can be heard again. I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. Carl Gustav Jung. Chapter 2. Jung and the Hidden Meaning of Darkness. Carl Gustav Jung approached human suffering in a way that was both deeply psychological and profoundly humane. He did not see emotional pain merely as something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. Instead, he asked a different question. What might this suffering be trying to tell us? This question does not imply that suffering is good, nor does it suggest that depression should simply be accepted or endured without seeking help. Rather, it reflects Jung's conviction that every profound psychological experience deserves to be understood before it is judged. Depression was, for Jung, neither a moral failure nor a punishment. It was a signal that something important within the psyche required attention. Sometimes the conscious life we have built no longer reflects who we truly are. Sometimes we become separated from our deepest values, our creativity, our relationships, or our sense of meaning. When this inner imbalance grows too great, the psyche may no longer remain silent. Jung often described symptoms not merely as enemies, but as messages. Painful messages, sometimes frightening messages, yet messages nonetheless. This perspective does not deny the biological reality of depression. Modern neuroscience clearly demonstrates that depression involves complex changes within the brain and body. Medication, psychotherapy, social support, and professional care can all play essential roles in recovery. Jung would almost certainly not have objected to using every available means to reduce unnecessary suffering. His contribution lies elsewhere. He reminds us that even while healing the illness, we may also ask what our life is asking of us. Perhaps both questions matter. One seeks recovery. The other seeks understanding. Neither replaces the other. Together, they may offer a more complete path. One of Jung's best-known ideas is the concept of the shadow. The shadow does not refer to evil. Rather, it includes those aspects of ourselves that we have ignored, rejected, feared, or pushed beyond awareness. Sometimes these forgotten parts contain pain. Sometimes they contain fear. Sometimes they contain unrealized gifts that have never been allowed to emerge. Depression does not always arise because of the shadow. Its causes are diverse and often involve biological, psychological, and social factors. Yet periods of depression may create moments in which long-ignored questions become impossible to avoid. Am I living according to my deepest values? Have I neglected relationships that truly matter? Have I spent years becoming the person others expected me to be, while forgetting the person I was meant to become? These questions rarely have simple answers, nor should anyone feel pressure to find them while struggling through severe depression. Sometimes the first task is simply to recover enough strength to continue living. Only later, perhaps, does reflection become possible. Jung never suggested that people should search for meaning instead of seeking help. The two are not opposites. Professional care can help restore stability. Reflection can help restore direction. Healing often requires both. Perhaps one of Jung's greatest gifts was his refusal to reduce the human being to a diagnosis. A diagnosis can guide treatment, but it never describes the whole person. Behind every diagnosis lives a unique human story. A story of love, loss, hope, disappointment, courage, fear, and countless invisible experiences known only to the person living them. This is why compassion remains indispensable. Before we see depression, we should try to see the person. Before we see symptoms, we should remember the life that surrounds them. Perhaps this is where Jung's psychology continues to speak with remarkable relevance today. He reminds us that beneath every struggle there remains a human being whose inner life is richer than any clinical description can fully express. Darkness deserves understanding, not because darkness itself is the goal, but because understanding often becomes the first quiet movement toward light. Depression is not simply in the mind. It also involves changes in the way the brain processes emotions, motivation, and everyday experiences. Understanding this can help replace misunderstanding with compassion and hope. Chapter 3. What happens inside the brain? When we experience physical pain, we rarely question whether it is real. A broken arm requires care. An infection requires treatment. No one expects these conditions to disappear simply through determination or positive thinking. Depression deserves the same understanding. Although its wounds are often invisible, they are no less real. Over the past several decades, neuroscience has transformed our understanding of depression. Rather than viewing it as a weakness of character, researchers increasingly recognize depression as a complex interaction between the brain, the body, personal history, relationships, life events, and genetic vulnerability. There is no single cause, and there is no single solution. The human brain functions through billions of interconnected nerve cells, communicating with one another. These networks help regulate emotion, memory, attention, motivation, and decision-making. During depression, some of these systems begin to function differently. Activities that once felt rewarding may no longer bring the same sense of satisfaction. Tasks that once seemed effortless may suddenly require enormous energy. The future itself may appear strangely empty, not because it has objectively changed, but because the brain has become less able to anticipate hope or pleasure. This is one reason why depression can be so difficult for others to understand. A person may sincerely wish to feel better. They may genuinely want to enjoy life again. Yet wanting and experiencing are not always the same. The capacity to experience joy has become temporarily diminished. One of the most painful features of depression is the way it influences thought. The mind often becomes caught in repetitive cycles of self-criticism, regret, hopelessness, or fear. Psychologists sometimes refer to this pattern as rumination, the tendency to revisit painful thoughts again and again without moving toward resolution. The more attention becomes trapped within these cycles, the more difficult it becomes to notice experiences that might otherwise bring comfort or encouragement. It is as though the mind begins listening to only one station on the radio. The same painful broadcast repeats throughout the day. Yet even here, neuroscience offers an encouraging insight. The brain is not static. Throughout life, it remains capable of change. This remarkable capacity is known as neuroplasticity. Every meaningful experience, every supportive relationship, every new skill, every healthy habit, and every effective form of therapy has the potential to influence the way the brain gradually reorganizes itself. This process is rarely immediate. It unfolds slowly, sometimes almost invisibly. One conversation may not transform a life. One therapy session may not erase suffering. One walk in nature may not dissolve despair. One melody may not lift depression. But each of these experiences may become one small thread in the gradual weaving of recovery. Healing often resembles the growth of a tree. Day by day, the changes appear almost impossible to notice. Year by year, the transformation becomes unmistakable. This understanding also helps explain why professional treatment can be so valuable. Psychotherapy does not simply offer advice. It creates new ways of understanding experience. Medication, when recommended by qualified healthcare professionals, may help restore biological balance for some individuals. Healthy sleep, physical movement, meaningful relationships, and regular daily rhythms also influence the brain in important ways. None of these approaches needs to compete with the others. Very often, they work best together. Perhaps this is one of neuroscience's most hopeful discoveries. The brain remains capable of learning throughout life. It continues adapting, continuously reshaping itself through experience. Depression may temporarily change the way the brain functions. Yet the brain itself never loses its remarkable capacity for change. This does not mean recovery is easy, nor does it mean every journey follows the same path. But it does mean that today's experience does not permanently define tomorrow's possibilities. The brain continues learning. The heart continues hopping. And somewhere between biology, relationship, understanding, and time, healing quietly begins to find its way. Depression is not a sign of weakness. It is a complex human condition influenced by biology, psychology, and life experience. Chapter 4. Can music reach where words cannot? Long before psychology became a science, Long before brain imaging revealed the remarkable complexity of the human mind, people had already discovered something extraordinary. Music could comfort. Not always. Not everyone. But often enough that nearly every culture on earth came to treasure it. A lullaby calms a restless child. A hymn offers strength during grief. A simple melody may unexpectedly bring tears to someone who believed they could no longer cry. Why does this happen? Part of the answer lies within the remarkable way our brains process music. Unlike ordinary speech, music does not belong to a single area of the brain. Listening to music engages widespread networks involved in hearing, memory, attention, movement, emotion, and even anticipation. When we hear a familiar melody, memories may return with surprising clarity. A forgotten moment from childhood. The voice of someone we loved. A place we have not visited for many years. Sometimes music seems to remember parts of our lives that words can no longer reach. This is one reason researchers have become increasingly interested in the relationship between music and emotional well-being. Studies suggest that music can influence mood, reduce perceived stress for some people, and support emotional expression in a variety of settings. Music therapy, provided by trained professionals, has shown benefits for certain individuals in specific clinical contexts, although it is not a cure for depression and is best understood as one possible component of comprehensive care. Perhaps music speaks a language older than words. Before we learn to speak, we already respond to rhythm. Before we understand language, we recognize tone, gentleness, and the reassuring sound of another human voice. Our earliest experiences of comfort are often musical before they become verbal. Perhaps this is why melodies continue accompanying us throughout life. Not because they solve our problems, but because they remind us that we are still capable of feeling. For someone living with depression, this can be deeply significant. One of depression's greatest losses is not only happiness. It is connection. Connection with other people. Connection with the world. Sometimes even connection with oneself. There are moments when speaking feels impossible. Explaining feels exhausting. Words seem too small for experiences that have no clear shape. Yet music asks for no explanation. It does not demand perfect sentences. It simply invites us to listen. Or perhaps when we are ready to sing. To play. To breathe with its rhythm. This does not mean every piece of music brings comfort. Each person responds differently. One melody may soothe, while another awakens painful memories. One person finds peace in silence. Another finds it in Bach. Another in a traditional hymn. Another in a simple folk song. Another in the quiet resonance of a harmonium. There is no universal soundtrack for healing. Only the deeply personal relationship each of us develops with sound. Perhaps this is why music deserves humility rather than grand promises. It cannot remove every burden. It cannot replace skilled psychotherapy, medical treatment, supportive relationships, or compassionate care. Yet it may offer something that is difficult to measure, but easy to recognize. A moment of breathing more deeply. A feeling that the heart has softened, if only slightly. A quiet reminder that beauty still exists, even when we struggle to notice it. Sometimes hope does not arrive through explanation. Sometimes it arrives through resonance. A single note. A gentle chord. A melody carried almost unnoticed into the silence. And perhaps that is enough for one moment. Then another. And another. Until, little by little, the heart begins to remember a song it believed had been forgotten. Music may not remove our suffering, but it can remind us that we are more than our suffering. Chapter 5. The Harmonium and the Returning Breath. There are moments when words become too heavy. Moments when explaining our feelings seems almost impossible. The mind feels tired. The heart feels distant. Even silence can seem overwhelming. Yet there is one companion that has remained with us since the first moment of life. The breath. We rarely notice it. It quietly accompanies every joy, every sorrow, every conversation, every sleepless night. Even when hope feels fragile, the breath continues. One breath, then another, without asking anything from us. Many contemplative traditions have observed that gently bringing attention back to the breath can help calm an agitated mind. Modern research, likewise, suggests that slow, steady breathing may influence the body's stress response and promote a greater sense of relaxation for many people. While this is not a treatment for depression in itself, it can become one small practice that supports emotional regulation and complements broader care. Music often follows the same rhythm. Every melody begins with a breath. Every sung note is carried by the quiet movement of air. Every phrase naturally rises, rests, and returns. Perhaps this is why music and breathing feel so closely connected. The harmonium is a beautiful example. Unlike many instruments, it breathes. Each movement of the bellows gently sends air through its reeds. The sound is not forced. It is sustained by a calm, continuous flow. In this way, the instrument becomes a quiet reminder of something deeply human. Its voice exists only because of breath. For those who play it, this relationship is often impossible to ignore. Hands move gently. The bellows open and close. The body settles into a natural rhythm. Attention gradually shifts away from constant mental noise toward the simple experience of sound unfolding in the present moment. Sometimes this experience is accompanied by singing, sometimes by a mantra, sometimes by a sacred text, sometimes by a melody without words. The form is less important than the quality of attention we bring to it. Contemplative traditions across the world have long recognized the value of repetition. A repeated prayer, a repeated psalm, a repeated sacred name, a repeated verse, a repeated breath. Far from being mechanical, gentle repetition can gradually quiet the constant stream of thoughts that often fills the mind. For someone living with depression, the mind may become trapped in cycles of painful rumination. The same fears, the same regrets, the same self-criticism. Again and again. A simple melody cannot erase these thoughts. A mantra cannot instantly remove suffering. Yet, for some people, a repeated rhythm or familiar musical phrase may gently redirect attention away from relentless mental loops and toward the present moment. In that sense, music or contemplative practice may become one of several supportive ways of cultivating calm and awareness. This is not about escaping reality. It is about meeting reality with a little more steadiness. Little by little, breath by breath, note by note. There is something profoundly hopeful about this. Recovery does not always begin with dramatic breakthroughs. Sometimes it begins with very ordinary moments. Sitting quietly, listening, playing a single chord, feeling the movement of the bellows beneath the hand, noticing one slow inhalation, one slow exhalation. Nothing extraordinary, and yet perhaps everything important, because healing often grows in the same way that music does, not through sudden noise, but through gentle continuity. The harmonium teaches patience. The breath teaches presence. The melody teaches trust. And together they quietly remind us that even after long silence, life is still capable of producing beautiful sound. The deepest transformations often begin in moments so quiet that only the heart can hear them. A quiet reflection. Perhaps this is why people have turned to music for thousands of years. Not because every melody removes suffering, but because music gently reminds us that we are more than our suffering. There remains within each of us a place that can still listen, still breathe, still hope, even if only for the length of a single note. Sometimes hope does not arrive with great certainty. Sometimes it begins with the quiet decision to take one more step. Chapter 6. The first note. There is a quiet truth that many people discover only after passing through great difficulty. Recovery rarely begins with a dramatic moment. It rarely arrives like sunrise after a long night, suddenly illuminating everything at once. More often, it begins so gently that we almost fail to notice it. One morning, we sleep a little better. One afternoon, we answer a message we had ignored for weeks. One evening, we step outside and realize that the air feels different. Nothing extraordinary has happened. Yet something has begun to move. Modern psychology reminds us that recovery is seldom a straight line. There are days of progress. There are days of discouragement. Sometimes it even seems that we are moving backwards. This can feel deeply frustrating. Yet healing often unfolds in spirals rather than straight lines. We revisit familiar places within ourselves. But each time, we do so with a little more understanding than before. This is why patience becomes one of the quiet virtues of recovery. Not passive waiting, but patient persistence. The willingness to continue taking small steps, even when the destination remains hidden. Nature offers countless examples of this rhythm. Seeds remain invisible beneath the soil long before anyone sees the first green leaf. The changing seasons remind us that winter is not the end of life. The tree appears empty. Its branches stand silent. Yet deep beneath the surface, life continues preparing for spring. Human beings are not so different. There are seasons of flowering. There are seasons of rest. There are seasons of grief. And there are seasons during which hope seems to exist only as memory. Yet memory itself can become a bridge. Sometimes we do not yet feel hope, but we remember that hope once existed. Sometimes we do not yet believe in tomorrow, but we remember that yesterday we survived. Sometimes we cannot yet sing, but perhaps we can still listen. And sometimes listening is enough. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. These words carry quiet wisdom. When we stand in the middle of suffering, we rarely understand its place within the larger story of our lives. Only later do we sometimes discover that even our darkest seasons taught us compassion, resilience, humility, or a deeper appreciation for ordinary moments. This does not mean suffering was necessary, nor does it mean we should seek it. Rather, it reminds us that suffering does not always have the final word. One of the greatest gifts another human being can offer someone living with depression is not advice. It is presence. To sit beside another person without trying to fix them. To listen without rushing toward solutions. To remain when words have become unnecessary. In many ways, genuine friendship resembles music. The most meaningful moments are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes the greatest comfort is found in quiet accompaniment. A shared silence. A gentle conversation. A hand resting upon another hand. A familiar melody played without expectation. Perhaps healing grows in relationships because human beings were never meant to carry every burden alone. This truth appears again and again throughout psychology, philosophy, and the world's contemplative traditions. We become stronger not only through independence, but through connection. Sometimes another person holds hope for us until we are able to hold it ourselves. Perhaps this is why the first note matters so much. Every beautiful melody begins with one simple sound. Not the whole composition, only the first note. Every journey begins with one step. Every conversation begins with one word. Every sunrise begins with the first hint of light beyond the horizon. Recovery often begins in exactly the same way. One breath, one conversation, one appointment, one walk, one page, one prayer. one melody, one act of kindness. None of these appears large enough to change a life. Yet together, they slowly become the music of healing. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson both psychology and contemplation quietly teach us. Human beings are remarkably resilient, not because they never break, but because, even after breaking, they often discover the extraordinary courage to begin again. And perhaps that beginning is already closer than we imagine. It may be waiting in the very next breath, or in the very first note. The brain can change throughout life. This remarkable ability, known as neuroplasticity, offers a scientific foundation for hope. Final reflection. The song that never truly disappears. There are times when depression convinces us that nothing within us remains untouched by darkness. It whispers that joy has ended, that meaning has vanished, that the future has already been written. Yet depression does not speak with the voice of truth. It speaks with the voice of suffering. And suffering, however powerful it may seem, does not know the whole story. The human heart is more spacious than despair. The human mind is more adaptable than hopelessness, sometimes allows us to believe. The human spirit, however one understands that word, whether through psychology, philosophy, faith, or simple human resilience, has an astonishing capacity to rediscover life, even after profound loss. Throughout this essay, we have explored depression from several perspectives. Psychology reminds us that depression deserves understanding rather than judgment. Neuroscience reminds us that the brain remains capable of change. Jung reminds us that behind every symptom lives a unique human story. Music reminds us that emotions sometimes find expression beyond words. Contemplative practice reminds us to return, gently and patiently, to the present moment. None of these paths claims to possess the entire answer. Each illuminates a different part of the journey. Together, they invite us to hold a more compassionate vision of what it means to be human. If you are reading these words while carrying the weight of depression, we hope you will remember one simple truth. You are not your diagnosis. You are not your darkest thought. You are not the voice that tells you nothing will ever change. You are a human being whose story is still unfolding. And stories are rarely complete in the chapter where the greatest struggle appears. If you are reading this as a friend, a family member, or someone who wishes to help another, perhaps the most precious gift you can offer is not perfect advice. It is your presence, your patience, your willingness to remain beside another human being while they slowly rediscover their own strength. Sometimes that companionship becomes the quiet bridge between despair and hope. Perhaps this is the deepest lesson music has offered humanity across the centuries. A melody does not exist because of a single beautiful note. It exists because every note, including the quiet ones, belongs to something greater. Human life is much the same. There are movements filled with celebration. There are movements marked by silence. There are passages of uncertainty. And there are moments when the music seems to disappear entirely. Yet silence is not the end of music. It is part of music. Perhaps our lives are like that as well. The heart may forget its song, but forgetting is not the same as losing. Sometimes the melody waits patiently beneath the silence, waiting not to be created again, but simply to be heard. Healing is rarely a single moment. More often, it is a quiet journey taken one small step at a time. Closing thought. Perhaps hope is not the certainty that tomorrow will be easy. Perhaps hope is simply the quiet courage to believe that the next breath, the next step, or the next note may already be leading us home. The path of harmony. Music psychology, neuroscience philosophy, contemplation.